everyone, welcome to Star Wars Canon. I'm Josh.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Scott.
Today we're going to be talking about the High Republic livestream event that happened earlier this week. First off, maybe we should talk a little bit about the High Republic era. What are you guys feeling about this new era of Star Wars?
I'm pretty excited. I mean, I feel like it's just uncharted territory, so we don't really know what's coming. And I mean, beyond maybe Yoda, like there's nothing that's really aligned with anything we've ever seen. So who knows? Like, and that's kind of really fun, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm really excited for a new era, or I guess an old era, since it takes a couple hundred years before sort of any Skywalkers are in the picture. But I'm really excited that they kind of have the freedom to sort of carve their own path in the Star Wars universe with it, and that really the only sort of tying thing to anything that we've known before is, so far that we know, is going to be Yoda, which is always kind of a fun guiding, wise character to be in the mix no matter what. So I'm really excited for the ideas that they presented on this, live stream and announcement talking about it, and sort of where all these different paths go from the different mediums that they're going to be tackling it with.
Yeah, I feel the same. I think that it's an interesting choice for era because they clearly didn't want to go as far back as like the Knights of the Old Republic, thousands of years. But yet it's far enough removed that, they can kind of do their own thing. And that's something, and we'll get into this as we talk about the live stream, I felt like the authors seemed most excited about was exploring this new era that really they could have tremendous freedom with. They didn't really have to worry about how it necessarily connected to more of the, galactic, Civil War era or the sequel trilogy era. They kind of had free reign to do what they wanted to do. But I'm with you guys. I'm excited to meet some new characters, but also really excited to see Yoda like in his prime, right? I'm thinking somewhere around 700 years old at this point. So he's kind of, right at the peak probably of his powers. As we'll get into this later, really excited that it seems like he'll be featured heavily in one of these series. So that's pretty cool. Maybe to get into the event, the event kind of kicked off with Kathleen Kennedy kind of announcing this era. And they showed this really cool trailer that they put together that was comprised of concept art that they had put together for the books and for kind of the event and what they were talking about. They have chosen 5 authors to really kind of lead the charge here on the High Republic era. And what's really cool is each of these authors has a substantial experience working in kind of the Star Wars universe. So we have Daniel Jose Older, who's wrote things like Last Shot, or written things like Last Shot, which is a Lando and Han Solo story. Claudia Gray, who did Master Apprentice and Bloodline. Justina Ireland is primarily known for her work in kind of the younger adult fiction, but she's done previously, I believe, 2 books, one featuring Lando and one more focused on the characters of the sequel trilogy. Kevin Scott, who did Dooku Jedi Lost, which was really great. And then Charles Soule, who is one of my favorite Star Wars authors, who recently did The Rise of Kylo Ren, did a Lando comic line. So really people who are all super experienced in the universe of Star Wars, and really just seem really excited about this opportunity. What did you guys think about, kind of the author's choice? And I know you guys have also read quite a few of these books from these authors.
Yeah, I mean, I think their passion was pretty contagious in the video. Like, they were having a good time. Like, they've all clearly been in this for probably, it sounds like, years, maybe. Like, we're just finding out about it, more recently, but it's been quite a while they've been working on and planning this. I've read, Master and Apprentice and Dooku Jedi Lost. They're 2 like my favorites. So just having both those authors on, I'm really excited about. At some point, we all have to go back and I think review things from each of these authors and talk about their style and what they bring to Star Wars, because I think they've all really expanded the canon tremendously.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I think what you said, Dan, probably resonates the most with me, is that their passion was really obvious when you saw them talking about these stories they're creating and the characters they're creating. And I think just the opportunity to kind of start fresh with Star Wars in a way. I know they definitely, appreciate the opportunity to kind of have a clean slate. And that not only would they all be tackling different mediums at different times, but they started all together and kind of constructed their own ideas and their own ideas of where they would take different characters or different concepts, and then kind of work together to meld them into what will become the High Republic. I assume, of course, alongside, people at Lucasfilm and Disney and the, Star Wars Story Group and whatnot. But it definitely was exciting to see this group, especially having read some of their work. For me, Charles Soule, who did writing the sort of first main book for the High Republic, his work in the comic industry is some of my favorite Star Wars stuff. The Lando miniseries he did is probably my favorite Star Wars comic stuff to come out in the last few years since they did a resurgence there. And so having seen what he can do with a small amount of words, that you get sort of in the comic medium, I'm really excited to see what he can do with a larger amount of words with this first book.
Yeah, and it really seemed like they all took their own, like you were saying, Scott, they all took their different approaches to this endeavor. But I was really excited to hear a lot of them talk about, how do we approach this project and kind of keep the core DNA of what Star Wars is, but also kind of introduce new and unexpected things that we haven't necessarily seen in the canon so far. One of the first things they started talking about with Daniel Jose Older was this concept of dinosaurs, which they hinted at this and then they really didn't pick up the thread. But that immediately kind of perked up my antenna. I was like, whoa, that's pretty exciting. Because, certainly we have great dragons and other creatures in the universe, but it really seems like they're leaning heavily into kind of taking this Arthurian myth kind of approach to the Jedi Knights. And they talked a lot about how this is really the golden age for the Jedi. They're at the height of kind of their powers and also the height of, I think, how they're seen in the galaxy. They're highly revered and kind of out there amongst the people and have like this very strong reputation. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of, as we go through these phases that they have planned, because that is also something they announced, is that this High Republic, project will take place in 3 different phases, which we know at least for phase 1 will take us through 2022, which is pretty incredible. But it'll be interesting to see through those phases, do we see a shift in maybe how the Jedi are perceived and ultimately get to where we see them in episode 1, which I would say is, or I think they even named that phase now kind of the fall of the Jedi. So be curious to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, I thought it was cool that they just started kind of that video a little bit like saying what was the premise that led them to this. And they said it was really that line from Obi-Wan that was, for over 1,000 years, the Jedi were guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, before the dark times. And what scares the Jedi? Those two premises were what they said they've kind of based this whole arc of the series off of. And it's really cool because, even when you go back to like Phantom Menace, we're still not seeing like knights. They're not really that. They're more like diplomats or something being sent out. So this idea of, like you said, like the Knights of the Round Table sort of out there, creating beacons to the outer rim or something. It sounds really cool to me.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Scott. I was just going to add to that really quickly, Dan, is, it seemed, by the time we get to episode 1, they are diplomats and kind of tied up very closely with the bureaucracy, which, as we know, kind of leads to the ultimate downfall of the Jedi. So seeing them still close to the Republic and kind of, serving as these peacekeepers, but also kind of out there and on missions and like in the frontier of the galaxy, I think is a new setting that we've never seen before, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I was gonna jump more off too of what you're saying, Dan, of this like Camelot-esque, like King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table. That it was interesting to hear them describe that that's the kind of the approach they want to take, of that we're seeing these kind of honorable, noble characters going out onto adventures to do good, but also taking sort of the Camelot approach of the Kennedy era, where you had the American dream was kind of in full flow. Anything was possible. We had space exploration and kind of reflecting that into the Star Wars universe. Because it's interesting that you brought up sort of the way Jedis are seen in The Phantom Menace, because even immediately when that movie opens, they're kind of in disguise, hiding, pretending to be diplomats. So we've never really seen the Star Wars universe at peace,
Right.
in a peacetime and populated with Jedi. So the fact that they're saying that like they're not in hiding, they have outposts, in every populated area. They're seen as the good guys. They're seen as helpful. They're not, trying to cover their tracks or anything. They're trying to be out in the open and trying to do good and trying to expand the galaxy. And, I'm sure it wouldn't be Star Wars without some pretty immediate conflict, but I think it's not going to be, we're not going to reach the fall of the Jedi for several hundred years. So it'll be interesting to see sort of the way the Jedi live in the world and the way people react to the Jedi and sort of the universe that's being created in this era versus the universe we're accustomed to from the Skywalker era.
Yeah, we got to assume that, again, there's something that happens between, the High Republic era and where we start in Episode 1, because I think what you mentioned, Scott, is that in the High Republic era, they're saying there's an outpost or a temple on every populated world. And by the time we hit Episode 1, as far as we know, really the only major temple is Coruscant, right? And while there are many Jedi in the galaxy, we get the sense that it's a far less group or far more restricted group than what we're seeing in the High Republic era. So I'm really going to be curious to see if we get some of that insight over these 3 phases of how we got to that place and how their role changed over that time. But I'm going to get your guys' thoughts on one other thing. And before we get into kind of the slate of books that they talked about, one of the primary characters they mentioned was this Chancellor of the Republic, Lena So, who apparently has this catchphrase, "We are the Republic," which I thought was pretty interesting and says a lot about the state of the galaxy. But to your point, Scott, on like the parallels with the 1960s US and kind of these groundbreaking initiatives, one of the things that the authors were talking about were these huge galactic programs that this chancellor is putting into place, which the Jedi are kind of part of. What were your guys' thoughts about that? It's really kind of an interesting concept where I don't think we've ever seen something like that in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fascinating. It's such a different take on things just to have someone in power who's good. I mean, just that alone is a unique concept to Star Wars. We'll see if it's true. Maybe that's part of the play. But I think this like concept of unity and having the Jedi as the ambassadors of bringing that message out to the broader world or universe. I think from what they're describing, it sounds like most of the Outer Rim is not yet even a part of the Republic, and who knows how far out that even is with exploration. So I think it'd be pretty cool as to how they kind of reach out to all of these areas that we're probably familiar with from, more standard Star Wars time periods that probably have had no contact with other planets or at least with the core worlds. And having the Jedi as the ambassadors and sort of the superheroes, it seems like bringing it to them is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think they touched on what they're referring to as the Starlight Beacon, which is kind of this, almost like, I guess, equivalent to our like ISS like space station that they were like put out and moved to be able to like unite these different rims, that have been previously sort of it's separated both technologically and just from distance and protection from the Jedi and whatnot in this universe. That's kind of the sort of central thing that a lot of the initial concepts and stories and whatnot focus around. But it is really interesting. It does, echo some of this, like 50s moon race and US expansionism and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see that kind of like, kind of like goal of perfection and goal of hope being reflected into there. And definitely from having, dabbled a little bit in some of these initial things, you do see that like "We are the Republic" being repeated by, people of, the Jedi, as well as just other people that are interacting with them already.
I'm curious if it'll actually be a time when the Jedi kind of merge with the politics. You know, like I wonder if they were separate before
Mm.
that. And this is kind of like, okay, we're starting to merge the two things together, which kind of ultimately leads down the line to where we see things by Phantom Menace.
Yeah,
That makes
I'm
sense.
not sure who said it as part of the panel, but one of the authors mentioned that this is an interesting time because the Jedi are kind of out there amongst the people, and they have kind of come out of their temples, and now they're in amongst the people. So they almost implied that this is a new era where the Jedi have started to become more integrated with the Republic. And something else I thought that was really interesting they mentioned is they said this is requiring the Jedi to be more flexible. So to me, that really made me think initially of Qui-Gon Jinn, right? And like the, you know, this concept of the living force and kind of like not being as legalistic with the rules, which again is where we see us ultimately swing back to in the prequel trilogy. But I think it'll be really interesting. The other thing, you know, no Sith, right? They said no Sith, which is very new for Star Wars, right? This is a brave new world with no dark side baddies, except for, we'll get into that a little bit, but no Sith, I think, is a huge step in the right direction. You know, how do you have conflict for Jedi without Sith? And, you know, like you said, Dan, what scares the Jedi? I think that's going to be really interesting to see how they create that conflict.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. You had brought up about that they're just kind of, I think one of the quotes I had written down is that they are treating Jedi as just a normal part of life. They're not like these mythical creatures or you know, these just like unknown things or these incredible, you know, superheroes. They're just kind of a normal part of their life. And I think it will be interesting to see just in one way the number of Jedi that we sort of get a sense of that exist in this time period as well. Because by the time we get to, you know, Phantom Menace and then definitely, you know, through Attack of Clones and Revenge of the Sith, that number definitely dwindles. But the most we're ever really seen in sort of one group is maybe like, you know, some of the Clone War elements and Battle of Geonosia and stuff like that. But, you know, when you get to Force Awakens, it's like they're a myth. You know, they don't know anyone, you know, that's a Jedi. Sure. It's not even real. So the fact that we might have just, you know, hundreds or thousands of Jedis that exist in this era and the way they work together and sort of interact with each other, I think will be interesting. I think you're right, Josh, that you're probably going to get a good variety of people that treat the Force differently. I think we saw that, you know, with some different ways Force abilities have been used over the years. Of, you know, some people are definitely, you know, more attuned to a lightsaber, and other people are more attuned to, you know, connections and healing and things like that. That I think it'll be interesting to be able to see if, like, you know, the Jedi are categorized in that way and utilized in different ways based on their, you know, where they're best fit with the forces.
Yeah, I think it would be amazing to that point, Scott, if we were able to see more exploration of different Force users and, you know, broadening the definition of, like, you know, what that means. And I think they've even indicated, and again, we'll get into this when we talking about the different books, but there's definitely at least one character they mentioned that seems like they're a Force user, but definitely not a Jedi. They called her a saber for hire, which to me, that, you know, again, perked right up. I was like, "Whoa, that's a cool concept." Someone who's like a rogue Force user out there who's just, you know, taking jobs for money. So some really cool stuff. But why don't we get into maybe some of the books that were announced, some of which have come out this week. The first being Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. I know you guys have started reading this book. I have yet to get to it. So from what I understand, though, from the event, you know, this really kicks off the High Republic era, and particularly revolves around this great disaster, which has to do with some issue with hyperspace lanes and ships being destroyed as they're traveling through hyperspace, and that kind of kicks off this conflict that we are introduced to our characters by. You guys have any initial thoughts, especially as you've been reading it? I know we're probably going to do another episode doing a deeper dive into the book, but what are your thoughts about this, and kind of where do you see this going?
Yeah, I'm not super far into it yet. And maybe just as a first thing to say to everyone, we will definitely be going through each of these and maybe breaking them down into smaller subgroups as we go forward, because this is like a whole new, you know, Star Wars 101 class on a different era. I think that's all to pick up on, which is really cool. But so far, the way the book starts is pretty exciting. I feel like it's like it jumps right into things, introduces a lot of new characters and concepts, but this great disaster, imminent threat is pretty interesting and very different than anything we've ever had in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm last I saw when I was still starting to read it, I think I'm like 24% through based on my Kindle reading on my iPad. And I really am liking it a lot so far. I think it kicks off with a bang. I think it jumps straight into this, what they're referring to as the great disaster, but also gives you a sense of sort of the hierarchy of characters and a little bit of info on the Starlight Beacon and sort of some of these kind of, I guess, tentpole ideas that are going to be featured throughout all these different mediums in this first wave of High Republic stuff. But I think it also, gives you a lot of insight into just the way the Jedi are at this time and the way they communicate with each other. And I think it already has some interesting elements of the Force that we've never sort of been able to explore before. That goes back to what I was saying before of just like what we've only ever seen limited number of Jedi. So how does the Force, work and exist and move between these characters when you have just a large scale number of people interacting? I also really like so far that the book is a little more, I'd say, Game of Thrones-esque, and not in that like people are dying, but more in the storytelling that every chapter sort of jumps to a different perspective. So I assumed, they might introduce, a main character that is going to be who you're following for like the main book series or something, through the High Republic era. But they've so far done a great job of, giving you a million different, well, not a million, but a lot of different viewpoints, as you're being introduced to this brand new era. And I think it does a really good job of shaping the different perspectives and ideas and concepts of everything that's going on.
And it seems like that's what they're going to be doing with kind of the era as a whole, is kind of jumping from perspective to perspective, having characters kind of come in and out of different stories to show kind of their different reactions to these larger events like the Great Disaster. An example of this is the other book that came out this week, A Test of Courage, which is a little bit geared towards a younger audience than Light of the Jedi, but this follows a new Jedi, a new character, Venestra Rowe, who is a 16-year-old Jedi, which initially kind of surprised me because I felt like that was pretty young compared to what we've seen for Jedi. But again, I think tells us a lot potentially about this era. But apparently, this book will cover her going on kind of a diplomatic mission to a new planet on the frontier of the Republic and trying to convince them to join the Republic. And as she's on the way to do this, the Great Disaster happens and, adventure ensues. So I think that's a really good example of how they're kind of tackling a similar event from different perspectives already in this first tranche of books. Have you guys read anything else about Test of Courage? What are your thoughts about what we're covering there?
Well, something first more broadly that I thought was interesting was they asked, what order do you read these in? And there is a release order, which is this is absolutely the chronological, but they were kind of like, it doesn't matter, pick up wherever because it is hitting the story from lots of different angles and you can read some of these or all of these. Of course, we're going to read all of them, but I found that interesting. And we'll get to this one in a second, but I read the comic already, even though I'm in Light of the Jedi, and I'm sure there was some element of spoiler, but it didn't really spoil the story. And I get a sense that's how A Test of Courage will be as well. The same event is occurring, but it's from such a different point of view that the story itself will be so unique. I'm pretty excited to read this one. I thought that 16-year-old concept is cool. In the similar way you felt that way, Josh. I was like, wow, that's pretty young to be a Jedi, but it kind of perpetuates this old time feeling that in medieval times, by the time you were a teenager, you were an adult and could have had children. It's kind of the same idea, I think, taking place here in the High Republic, that you're a full-blown adult at that point and a Jedi. And the counter to that being Anakin, not being able to be a Jedi until he's much older, and like the challenges that eventually creates. Like I think it helps to give more context to some of the stuff from the eras we're used to.
Yeah, I'm excited to read this one, even though they're more on like the junior level. I think just to expand the world of High Republic and absorb as much as I can. But I do think it'll be interesting to see sort of that 16-year-old Jedi take and sort of that perspective and being in that position of sort of trust and power and like having to have that courage. I think already even just within Light of the Jedi, one of the master and Padawans that you're following, the Padawan is 17 or 18. I think he says he was, been training for 14 or 15 of his like years, and he's had 3 years where he wasn't training or something. So you already have someone that's, older than this character that's still a Padawan. So I think it'll be cool to see these different ages and how that may tie to just different races and different characters and other things like that are within the universe that advance or age in different ways, and get a little more insight into that as well.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I think each of us have now read the first issue of the High Republic Marvel comic series, which again picks up right after the events of Light of the Jedi. So you have, which I believe is the primary character of Light of the Jedi, Avar Kriss, who's a Jedi Master, now becoming the Marshal of Starlight Beacon, which was that station temple, which we should probably mention. And something I thought was pretty cool is that this Starlight Beacon is not only like a base for the Republic, but it is a Jedi temple as well in space, which is, I think, just a pretty cool concept. One of the comic though covers a Jedi Padawan, Creve Tennis, who's kind of going through the trials to become a Jedi Knight in this first issue. And I think in this first issue, I already have maybe found my favorite character of the High Republic so far, Master Skier, who's a Trandoshan Jedi Master. In this first issue, he is missing an arm, which they indicate he lost during the events of Light of the Jedi, so we'll have to kind of cover how that happens. And also cool, it's indicated that he will grow that arm back since he is a Trandoshan, which I thought was really cool.
Like, did we know that about Trandoshans? Like, I thought that was a cool fact too.
I think that might have been noted in maybe some of the older canon, relative to Bosk maybe, but to see them kind of bring that back was really cool. But also seeing a one-armed Jedi is also pretty cool too.
Yeah.
I'm already hoping for Bosk and the Boba Fett show to just have like a tiny little like baby arm like growing off the side.
Yeah. I thought that that first issue is really cool, and I feel like it's because it's so character centric. It doesn't feel like it's. I didn't really find anything, reading it and then jumping into Light of the Jedi after that, and knowing that it take place after that, it really spoiled any of the events of Light of the Jedi, which was cool. Outside of knowing that this great disaster happened of some kind, and now I'm going to read a book about the great disaster, basically. But I thought that it was really interesting in that it showed a little bit more, I guess, of the flexibleness of the Jedi. Like, and you were saying earlier, Josh, that the Jedi have to be flexible, that sort of the way that these trials go, don't necessarily go as planned sort of in this, but they sort of take that and run with it and use it. So it does show that they at this time period, or at least these Jedi Masters, have a little more freedom in terms of the way they treat their Padawans, and that's not as strict as not a sort of just check boxes that determine whether someone's a Jedi Master or a Jedi Knight at all. And I did think that it was a lot of fun that, having jumped into this before I started Light of Jedi, that the first Jedi Master I got to see or hear about in the High Republic stuff was a one-armed Jedi Master. It was pretty fun.
There were some cool Jedi Master characters in that in general, like just the way they looked and the like species, and one with like lots and lots of hair. I don't know that species. It might be a new one in there. It made me think right away though, and I saw this character chart earlier this week, and I'd be remiss for not bringing them up, but could Opa Rancis make an appearance? Like, could we finally see Opa Rancis do something? Because I think he's like 300 years old or something. So it should add up pretty close.
Yeah, I think that they mentioned that master by name in the issue. Ventir, maybe something like that.
Yeah,
He's a grandmaster along with Yoda at this period, but his look certainly reminded me of Opa Rancis, so that was pretty cool. And hopefully we'll get an Opa Rancis cameo. The other thing that they mentioned regarding the comic series, and we should mention this series is written by Kevin Scott, but we will be, I guess, seeing 2 other Jedis who are twins, Tarek and Sarek, who apparently share one mind between them, which is another just kind of trippy concept, which I can't wait to see how that plays out. And then the other Jedi that was featured in this first issue is Starling Maru, who is the master of the station. He kind of keeps everything running. The authors refer to him as the master of multitasking, which certainly from this first issue seems true. So I was pretty impressed how much kind of heavy lifting they did in this first issue with kind of introducing us to all these characters and establishing kind of the world in a really kind of breezy, speedy way without, making it feel like we're getting huge information dump. So very impressed and super excited to see where we go from here.
Yeah, and I think the intro of the Starlight Beacon was cool to me in that it reminded me a lot of like Sword from Marvel, or even like the Justice League tower, or not tower, whatever that thing is that they have outside of Earth's satellite system. Yeah. But it had that similar feel, and Starling Maru reminded me a lot of like the Martian Manhunter on that or something. Like it gave me very similar vibes to that, which was cool. And I think as the authors were talking about their inspirations, they said they were inspired, of course, by Star Wars, but they were really inspired by a lot of other big pop culture franchises over history. And I thought it was cool that they were bringing those elements into this. It's almost like we're getting a Star Wars fantasy series, even though Star Wars is a fantasy series, but it's kind of neat to see that from that point of view.
Yeah, I think this was really kind of a pretty perfect starting issue to introduce some fun characters and then also just touch on some lore. This was the first peek at Yoda in this era, but it was also like he was not the main event. Like he was just there. He was a character. He's in this world. He exists, which was cool to see that they didn't try to do some over the top, introduction of Yoda or anything like that. They just treated him as a Jedi that exists in this world, is what he would be, at this time period. And I'm excited to see more about the twins and the way they share the one mind, and whether that's like force driven and things like that. Just because of the way some of the sort of force is one that they've treated in some of the early pages of Light of the Jedi, I think is really cool. And kind of would be interesting to see that focused and sort of highlighted within a specific couple characters.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about what's next, because these were the 30 things that came out this week, but we won't have to wait long for kind of the next installment in the High Republic. The next big kind of release is Into the Dark, which is Claudia Gray's novel that will follow a Jedi or a group of Jedi who are traveling to the Starlight Beacon when the great disaster happens. Do you guys have any thoughts on kind of Claudia's description of this? It sounds like it will be a mix, not only of Jedi, but also kind of introducing some pilots, some kind of Han Solo-esque characters into the mix.
Yeah, this comment she made about the 1990s Matthew McConaughey was, I think, the most interesting.
And the concept art too looked just like Matthew McConaughey. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, once she said it, you're like, oh, okay, that's what you were going for. But it's a pretty clever idea, and I could see it working pretty well. I felt like that one was harder for me to get the concepts down, just because it seems like it is steps after we've learned some things here, and she was much more reserved with her content because of that. So it sounds like they've got a lot up their sleeve there, and we might just have to catch up with the books by February for that to come out, right? It's February.
I think February 2nd it releases,
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this one. I think you're right, Dan. She had to be a little more vague, so not to spoil some of these sort of High Republic launch titles. But the stuff that she described for it, that you get a mix of Jedi as well as non-Force users, and that a lot of the people sort of along the way would be pilots and things like that. I think that's some of the stuff that really connected with me in, like the Mandalorian show and some of these other sort of non-film sort of material, whether it's books or comics. I always kind of really like seeing, what is a normal person or someone that, doesn't have the Force? How do they exist in this universe? So I think seeing those two juxtaposed will be really interesting and really cool. And the way she described the characters, especially the Matthew McConaughey-esque one, just sounds like she's having a lot of fun writing this book.
One other thing that I thought was really cool, she gave us a little tidbit here, but it sounds like, as they're en route to Starlight Beacon and the great disaster happens, they get marooned on this abandoned ancient space station, which they initially think is kind of the perfect place for them to kind of ride out the disaster. But then it turns out that the station has its own secrets, which to me, I was like, are we going in kind of this like horror, kind of like mystery vibe? Like it sounds, like Alien. I'm like, okay, this is now getting kind of juicy. Like I like where this is headed. So pretty excited about where that one goes. And then maybe jumping to the next title here, which is another comic series, The High Republic Adventures, which is going to be published through IDW. This will be the series that features Yoda, and I believe it's written by Jose Older. And the way that he described this was that it will be Yoda and a group of Padawans traveling across the galaxy in this craft called the Starhopper, and essentially getting into adventures during this almost kind of like gap year experience for the Jedi, which I think again is like, okay, that's something I never would have thought of or expected, but I'm totally here to see Yoda kind of pal around the galaxy with some young Jedi and get up to craziness.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a really fun time. I think they called it like Rumspringa Jedi or something like that, which was pretty hilarious. And that guy was clearly passionate about this crazy named character in there, this Buckets of Blood, which I'm very curious to see that. I said it was inspired by being like an EMS and a person that he worked with, I guess, in this. But it's an interesting name, especially for what is probably more towards the children's end of the spectrum of these books. I'm curious to see where they go with it.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a lot of fun. I think we've had a lot of small moments of like wisdom with Yoda over the years that I think this having a series where he's kind of the guardian of, like some, kids basically in their gap years, they're describing it, going on some adventures, that I think we have a lot of opportunities for some fun Yoda tidbits. And I do think it's so funny that they were like immediately open saying that this was, targeting the younger audience of, Star Wars readers, but there's also a character named Buckets of Blood that will be heavily featured.
And I guess it's primarily Yoda and then a Padawan, Luca Tausula, which again, another very young Jedi who's central character. There's definitely a theme here, of like creating characters who I think are fairly young, and maybe that's so that we can kind of, track their journeys across the three phases, and maybe that three phases is a very long period of time, and we see them through their life. But I thought that was pretty interesting, and the concept art that they showed, or I guess the some of the sketches of that series looked incredible. Particularly Buckets of Blood looks like an amazingly cool Jedi character. They showed some images of him side by Yoda, and Yoda's obviously Yoda and tiny, but this guy is huge. Like he is this huge, like mammoth, like Jedi character who looks like he could definitely spill a few buckets of blood for sure. He looks pretty tough. But kind of moving on here, and this is in point of the live stream where they started to really get into the villains of the High Republic, the Nihil, which I gotta say, I mean, they were very, very cryptic about the Nile in a way that I really appreciated, but they kept alluding to these are like the worst of the worst. Like at one point they said, think Vikings, but way worse. Like they have no honor and they will do the most horrendous things.
I'm really excited about these. Like, I mean, just the concept art and visual, they're really cool looking. The like main bad guy, I guess, of the bunch. I know that they mentioned repeatedly that it's just a really, really cool character that they feel really strongly about. But again, they didn't really tell us much of what that actually meant. But you just get the sense that they were trying to come up with something that is going to, you know, best a Jedi. And I think that's a pretty interesting concept to think about without the Force involved.
Yeah, I think it'll be really cool. I know that Charles Soule had mentioned that sort of the bad guy that in some of his first waves, that's like kind of we assume will be the Nile leader, was his sort of favorite character to write for and sort of come up with. And I think that when you see how it's actually spelled of Nihil, we're only a couple letters away from nihilism. So I think that really speaks to what these characters are sort of their belief system is, and sort of that description of, Vikings that believe in nothing kind of seems like it'll be a really, really cool approach to some villains. Especially since what we've only ever seen before of, you know, we're basically just generic pirates or Sith, you know, and Sith have a different, a very definitive sort of ideology behind them. So I think having that freedom to create a new sort of era of baddies is really fun and interesting to see how that plays out.
And they did say they are pirates, right? But they made it very clear that these are not nice Pirates of the Caribbean style pirates. And frankly, you know, you look at these characters, and the thing that immediately popped in my mind is this looks like something you see in like Mad Max. Like these look like these post-apocalyptic cannibals. Like they're terrifying looking. Like you wouldn't want to meet them in a dark alley. So they certainly seem like a formidable threat to the Jedi, and I'm really excited. I think Charles Soule mentioned the main bad guy's name is Markian Ro, which is like the leader of the Nile, but they indicated they felt like, you know, he was shoulder to shoulder with some of the classic Star Wars villains, which is a bold claim. So super excited to see where that goes.
And I think you had mentioned it, Dan, that like when we were talking about sort of them coming up with their ideas, that one of their key ideas of like what scares the Jedi being like their approach to like in this time of peace where, you know, the Jedi are on top of, you know, at this point, what would scare the Jedi? It sounds like the Nile are kind of the answer to that question of like, all right, what would come in and disrupt the peace in a way that sort of is just so polar opposite to the sort of society that they've been creating and establishing and the type of sort of influence within the communities that they're trying to become.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, like kind of like Captain America, who has this like deep moral compass feeling, seems like what the Jedi are right now. And so if you bring in these characters who seem to only care about chaos and destruction, like how does that change that character? It's sort of like, you know, that Captain America journey could be very similar to the Jedi's journey of how you feel by the time you get to Civil War. It's going to change them.
And not to like go too far down the comic book analogy, but when you say, you know, Captain America, Dan, and I automatically think, you know, Nile sound like the Joker, right? Like they just kind of want to like, you know, see the world burn and they don't care, which, you know, is the scariest possible adversary, right? That has no concern about anything. So
definitely
these will be cool baddies to watch. And they did mention one other villain for the series, which I'm not sure which I'm more excited about, but they created this new species called the Drenir, which is described as a telepathic dark side plant, sentient dark side plant. And you're just like, again, never really thought that would be a thing, but that sounds amazing. And they eat people, which is incredible.
Honestly, this part of the discussion they were doing was probably where I got the most excited about these people, because I'm like, if you can go this far out with this crazy of a concept as a dark side plant that is a sentient mobile species, then you are trying to, get to the deepest levels of fandom. So I'm really curious about it. I mean, I think it was Claudia who was describing some of it, and she was talking about like hurricanes and how her plants like bounce back right away from it, and how they kind of can withstand anything. And when you really start to think about that at like a deeper level, it actually is a pretty scary concept if they are doing so for evil. I'm curious if it's like going to be independent or related to the Nile. Like that wasn't clear from it. I guess they're probably independent, but it'd be interesting to see if they were somehow together, or they bring them sort of like you bring parasites to something, or how that could work.
Yeah, I'm excited for it, because I always love when they explore these sort of different ways that the Force can influence something. I think, just like the mainline Star Wars movies were so focused on the Skywalker story that we really just had like Jedi and Sith, or the light and dark side interacting. But with stuff like Clone Wars or Jedi Fallen Order, you had sort of like magic coming into play with like the Night Sisters and whatnot. So I think sort of showing where these other sort of mystical elements, whether it's the Force or not, and how they can sort of exist outside of just a standard, Jedi and dark side user, a lighter, dark side user. I think it's always really interesting. So that's another reason why I'm excited with, I know these are supposed to come into play within Into the Dark. So that'll be a really interesting way to hit the ground running on that series.
And, they've played with the concept of plants, I feel like, in a lot of stuff with Star Wars before. Like the spiders that we just saw in the second episode of this season of Mando, the original sketch for that from Ralph McQuarrie was these spiders that ultimately like plant themselves in the ground and then become the trees, and then like it's this like perpetuating cycle from there. And we have the dark side tree as another thing with that. So like I'm curious if there'll be that kind of stuff will be tied into any of this in the long run, like if those things become places where the dark side can flourish, where these plants become more prevalent.
Yeah, and also a really cool concept of like, everything is connected to the Force, and everything has light and dark, and some things gravitate more to one side or the other. Like I think that's fascinating to explore. And the other thing that I thought was really cool is they indicated that these creatures kind of communicate through this like neural network of roots, and like, just really deep, heady, kind of gnarly concepts. We were like, wow, we are getting kind of out there in a weird way, but I love it. Like, let's get weird. Let's bring some crazy stuff into Star Wars and see where it goes.
Yeah,
so
it's like Guardians of the Galaxy or something, and
yeah,
I love that.
I was gonna say I love to see them branching out.
Oh, you did it.
These are the evil Groots.
Yeah.
So moving right ahead, guys, the next announcement, I kind of remember hearing about this, but to get more kind of confirmation and see how much they were leaning into this really excited me as someone who used to really look forward to receiving the Star Wars Insider every month. But they'll be doing these short serialized fiction pieces in the Insider on a monthly basis, kind of giving more insight from various perspectives of characters in the High Republic, and maybe even characters that wouldn't merit their own book or their own series, but covering smaller side characters and just fleshing out that world in a more consistent way. But I, for one, was really excited, and I think it's going to be cool to see how they kind of sprinkle in details of the world, even in that shorter form.
Yeah, that's so cool. That they're doing that, and really good for them for the ambition of how many different medias this is going to cross.
Yeah.
Really, really neat. And I still think they're probably going to get to film with that. So it seems like phases here have a build up to probably something bigger. But haven't got a Star Wars Insider probably since I was a kid, but I will now be back to getting them. Like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat of I can't remember the last time I had a Star Wars Insider, but then as soon as they announced this, I was on the site looking at, all right, how much for a year subscription, digitally that gets sent to my iPad that I can read every month. And I really like the idea of having the freedom, especially knowing that some of these first ones are going to be High Republic sort of short stories that tie into things. I know, I think they mentioned that sort of the first couple are going to like bookend Light of the Jedi. But having picked up the From a Certain Point of View books, that they've only done 2 of those in a couple years, and sure, you get a lot of stories within those, but you really don't have any other opportunities to get sort of these almost like one-shot non-comic stories, these like written out one-shots. And so having that as an opportunity to have 1 or 2 of those every month, sort of with the Insider, and pretty low cost to pick up a full year of that, I think is a really cool, additional outlet for these authors.
Absolutely. So then they did discuss a little bit of the plan that's a little further out this year. So one of the books that will be coming out, I believe in the summer, is The Rising Storm, which is from Cavan Scott, who's currently writing the Marvel series. But this is going to shift the focus to a Jedi called Stellan Gios, and the plot will revolve around what's being described as the Republic Fair, which sounds a lot like the World's Fair here in our reality. And we'll also feature this new character, Ty Yarrick, who I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, but she is what they're calling a murky character. So that sounds like somebody who might be more, a little bit of dark side, a little bit of light side. Monster Hunter is another descriptor they use for her, and also Saber for Hire. So I could see this quickly becoming a contender for people's favorite character going forward.
That Saber for Hire thing, I mean, that could be just its own concept, period.
Mm-hmm.
That is bounty hunter at another level. It's more like a ninja, it sounds almost like, which, Star Wars needs ninjas, so I'm on board. The concept art for Stellan, when I first saw that, was probably the thing that got me like the most excited. I mean, I cosplay Star Wars stuff all the time, and I was immediately thinking about building that costume and building that lightsaber hilt that looks like Excalibur lightsaber edition. So I'm really curious to learn more about that character and see what they have in mind there.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I think it's one, cool to know that we already have this like roadmap of stuff that we're going to get in kind of 2 sets within this first month, and then we'll hit the middle of the year and have another 2 sets of stuff that is going to come out starting with this. But I really do like the concept of Ty Yarrick and being able to explore that sort of gray area of where they fall in the good or bad. I almost got a little bit of like almost like Witcher vibes in terms of that character, of like what they are doing and sort of what their purpose is. And I'll be curious to see sort of then what the like level of respect from a real Jedi that they get, and then sort of how they're almost just perceived in the world, whether they're seen as sort of a necessary evil, whether they're seen as a positive, whether they're seen as a negative. It's another one of those things where we'll be able to see someone that's outside of just a Jedi or a Sith person that's wielding a lightsaber.
You just made that character sound even cooler yet again, like a Witcher Star Wars version. Whoa, it's got so much potential.
Yeah.
Well, then they announced that Cavan Scott's also following that up with an original graphic novel, The Monster of Temple Peak, which will be a prequel to The Rising Storm and will kind of feature what Ty Yarrick was doing previous to that novel. So first of all, great, we're getting more of that character, and also really cool that they're doing this standalone graphic novel, which I can't remember the last standalone graphic novel we got for Star Wars, so that's going to be really cool to see.
For sure.
Yeah, I think what's fun about seeing this sort of calendar of release is that you get to see all of the 5 authors that are involved in this. And I think one thing we can talk about once we dive deeper into these things, as the months that go by, is also then the artists they're tied to some of these graphic novels and comics as well. But I think, especially seeing sort of the roadmap that they've set out, that you get to see these authors jump into different mediums and sort of explore different opportunities there, whether it's, you know, a long form book or whether it's some of the like young adult era stuff, or the comics. And so knowing that, Kevin Scott's going to have it's his own shot at just a graphic novel, I think is really cool.
That is really cool. They announced three other titles that I believe are all coming out this year. Out of the Shadows, which will be another young adult novel from Justine Ireland. This will feature again Venstra Rowe, who we previously saw, and also Yoda will have a primary role in that. Not a lot of other information that we got beyond that. And then we also learned Justina was going to be working with a Japanese author on this original manga, The Edge of Balance, which will explore kind of Jedi again on the frontier of the Republic. And she really stressed that, you know, it would be very true to Star Wars, but also very much an authentic manga, which I really thought that was cool. They were kind of respecting that.
I like that Star Wars is leaning into these Japanese concepts, you know, with what they announced with the show coming out. And with this, I think it's really cool because a lot of, you know, the original inspiration came from Japanese cinema. And so it's just neat to see them perpetuate that.
Yeah, I think this was one of only a couple books that didn't get dated, The Edge of Balance, the manga. And I wonder if that's simply because they want to have it come out alongside Visions, which is also supposed to come out this year and be, you know, some anime, you know, famous and well-known anime directors and writers doing really their take on Star Wars. So I think if they're able to time those to be released sort of in the same window, I think that would be really cool to have this, you know, Japanese approach to Star Wars that we get to sort of absorb in one huge wave.
That's a good point. And then the last title that they announced was Race to Crashpoint Tower, which will be another middle-aged young adult novel from Daniel Jose Older. They did announce the character for this would be Ram Jomiram, who is another Jedi Padawan who lives on the planet where this Republic fair is happening, the one that we saw in the Rising Storm. I thought it was really cool kind of how they dug into Ram's character. He's very mechanically minded and almost implied that he has kind of this force ability or force power that makes him mechanically minded. And then he has these team of creatures, which they showed the art for, which looked really cool, called Bombrax. And also a droid that apparently can convert to a vehicle. So now we have Transformers in the Star Wars universe, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, this like force repair concept, whether it's the force or just like it's also his ability in it, I thought was really cool. Like I'd like to see them explore that more. I mean, I always liked that about Anakin. He was like a tinkerer. So I think if they could make that kind of really the core concept of the character, and I mean, geez, they named him Ram, so they're being pretty on the nose about their plans there, but I like it. I think it's kind of cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this will be fun. Especially I know Daniel Jose Older is writing this one and had mentioned that Luca Tausula would be in this as well in some regard. So I think it's fun. Another one where you have this author that's able to move into a different medium and carry the same character. I know when they're talking about sort of some of their favorite characters they want to write for, that was the one that he mentioned specifically was the one that he sort of loved to almost just see naturally evolve as he started to write different elements of the character out. So seeing him be able to take that character and move it across different mediums and write it in different ways, I think it will be an interesting point just to see for that character alone too.
It's an interesting point, Scott. And I think, you know, back to your statement, you know, kind of on Game of Thrones, I think really what they're doing here is creating a core stable of characters who are going to follow through these different phases. And I think that's super exciting, but also makes me a little scared because I know that we're going to lose these characters. Like we're going to lose certain characters. And that was one of the things that also excited me about kind of how the authors were speaking about kind of the project was nothing's off the table. Like, you don't know what to expect. And they're not gonna, be afraid to kind of raise the stakes by killing off characters here and there, which is going to be hard, especially when you follow these different characters through all these various, iterations, whether it be books or comics or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the cool thing here to me, just as like like in summary or something, as we talk about the last piece here, the phases, this almost feels like the expanded universe. Like, again, like that feeling of just like endless opportunity and interesting things to dive into. And I feel like Star Wars fans just love that. Like we, like it's just the core of who we are. We want to go see more, know more, connect more things to each other. And I don't feel like I was super excited when they first announced this, but like over, the last couple of months, and then definitely over this week of just starting to dive in, I'm like really excited about it. I think there's so much cool stuff here, and it's got a lot of potential to take us into a direction we've just never been with Star Wars.
Yeah, I'm I'm really excited about it in that, yeah, we just don't know what to expect because it is this untouched era, and they've made it very clear that they're crafting sort of their own path and carving their own path into it. And having just touched in Light of the Jedi a bit already, I'm loving what I've read so far and getting some of the same vibes that I got when I read sort of like the Canon novel that sort of talks about sort of the foundation of some of what goes into Rebels, because that was just stuff that we had never heard about before. We hadn't really read about Padawans post Order 80 or Order 66, that were like in hiding and sort of what their life had become in sort of a deep way. So it's really cool to see that they have this fresh take, and that they have this roadmap of stuff that's out there, and some of the stuff that they didn't even get to in this announcement, but they opened sort of talking about all the different publishing branches that are involved in this. And I think all these books and this first roadmap that they're more publicly talking about really only covers 4 or 5 of the 9 or 10 that they brought out. So I know they mentioned DK, so I'm sure we'll get some sort of visual dictionary, some other things. There'll just be these deep lore dives into the High Republic, which will be really cool. Already out is a sort of younger kids book that was, features a Wookiee with a lightsaber on the cover. That's, a short form for little kids that I'm still going to read and check out, but wasn't even, sort of in their sort of main crux of what they were covering in this announcement. And so I think, even beyond these like 10 or 11, 12 things that we covered today, that there's more coming outside of that, in this sort of expanded realm, which would be really cool to see too, where all that stuff touches.
Yeah, you got to imagine that, the plan is to incorporate this more into, the other projects that are going on. I mean, they've already indicated that the Acolyte show will kind of occur at the tail end of the High Republic era. And I really wouldn't be surprised if we saw, a game or some other tie-ins. This era seems, ripe for that kind of thing. And we know, based on what they said earlier this week at this event, that Phase 1 runs through some point in 2022. So I would imagine we have at least 4 or 5 years to get through all 3 phases of this, if not more. So a lot of content coming, a lot of exciting stuff. And I think, just as you guys said, it's pretty cool to get to know new characters and to have kind of the Star Wars universe expand in a new, fresh way. So here at Star Wars Canon, we're going to be reviewing everything, even, The Great Jedi Adventure. Scott's going to be doing a breakdown video for us of that at some point.
Yeah, and we'll also plan on breaking down these characters for you so that you know more about, where they are, how they fit into the story, some of their background and things like that. Like there's just a lot to take in here, which is exciting.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Dan. Like we I think initially, hearing all this information and then starting to dig into some of the books and comics, there are a ton of characters, and I think we'll certainly be making some videos that kind of cover the different connections and how everyone relates to each other in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. We'll have to do a deep dive in some botany to learn about the Drengir a bit more.
You need to just come in next episode dressed as a giant plant.
Like the
Jolly
Green Giant.
Exactly. All right, well, great. Well, thank you guys for your thoughts on all of this. We are super excited, and I think next episode, we'll do a deeper dive into Light of the Jedi and talk some about what goes on in that novel and some of our thoughts. So, may the Force be with you, everyone, and have a great week.
We are the Republic.
See ya.